Hello, and welcome back to the Social Good Instigators podcast. You may have noticed the shift that's happening among businesses and the nonprofit NGO sector. Individuals, companies, and organizations are becoming much more cognizant of their impact on the world. Our guest today, Godelieve, will be sharing some insights into the shift that she gained while working on a report entitled Research New Economy. That report is available on her website at creatingchange.nl.
Welcome to the Social Good Instigators podcast, where your host, Kirsten Bullock, interviews leaders of social entrepreneurship ventures who share what's working. Please add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. Now, let's get on with the show.
Hi, Godelieve. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi. Hi, Kirsten.
So good to have you on the show. Now, a couple interesting facts about Godelieve. First, she's a dancer, a social scientist, and an organizational developer. So she brings a unique perspective to her work and combines all those things in the ways that she sees the world. And she has a PhD in interdisciplinary studies from the University of South Africa with a focus on social and sustainable entrepreneurship. So she spent a lot of extended time looking into these things and exploring them. And today she's going to share some more about a research report that she's put together that covers some of these topics. So Godelieve, would you mind sharing just a brief overview of what the report covers to help us get a good overview of that?
Sure. Thank you, Kirsten. When I started my research, I was very curious about organizations that wanted to become sustainable or social entrepreneurs, what that meant for their way of organizing, if they could do it in the same way companies are organized right now, or that if it required something else. And of course, I assumed it required something else. So what I did is I contacted a couple, let's say 12 companies that were cutting edge, very, very innovative in the field of social and sustainable entrepreneurship. And I tried to figure out how they were organized and how that differs from the way we do that right now. So that is what my report is about, and what I figured out is, of course, that they were organized totally different from the organizations that we know now. And the biggest differences lie in the fact that instead of having just one single goal, they had combined purposes. The second thing is that instead of defining an organization as a closed unity, as kind of an open space where people and organizations go in and out. And the last thing is that they considered the outcomes of their organization, not just the things they were making, but the effect and the impact they had on whatever happens in their surrounding as well. So that is the three major points of difference in organizing in a sustainable and social way.
Great. And in your report, you talk about the new economy. How do you define that new economy?
Yeah, that was actually a very important question also at the start of my report, because once you say, well, what is sustainable and social entrepreneurship? What type of economy are we talking about? And what kind of organization do I want to research? So what I came up with is that one of the most important things we are facing right now is that our resources are coming to an end. So we need to find ways to use less and generate more, and not generate more in making more things, but generating more and generate more resources. So each company needs to use less resources and generate their own resources. That's one thing. And the other thing in a new economy is that you make use the best way you can in a just way of the abundant resources we do have, so much as expressions, ideas, knowledge, creations that people make, because there are so many people and talents and gifts in the world that we're not using right now, and that really could help out to make that new way of producing things and making making services in a totally different way. So a new economy uses less, generates more resources, and uses the abundant resources that are available throughout the world in a just and rewarding way. So that's what is, which could say the new economy is based on. What that implicates, in fact, is that we redefine our relationship with nature. So where organizations right now in the economy see themselves as just an organization making as much profit as they can, they start defining whatever they do in relationship with nature. And they start defining the way they do it in terms of how they relate with people and how people relate amongst each other within and outside their organization. So that's a very important aspect too. And it makes an economy not just kind of an objective structure or system, but it's a subjective system. So it's a system that we kind of define, and we can redefine it if we want to. So that brings in that the moral quality or the ethics within an economy are no longer defined or arranged for by the system, but we ourselves have to bring them in. So a new economy is also a moral economy. So, well, that's briefly what I could say about that right now. But if you want me to dig into something, please ask.
Yeah. And I've seen that trend with companies, definitely for-profit companies, making sure to look more at the carbon footprint that they have in the world and try to reuse resources and doing that. In the organizations that you interviewed, did you get some ideas for how NGOs or nonprofits might be able to implement some of these things?
Yeah, I did. But I'd like to, if you don't mind, going back to your remark that you just made, that many companies are, in fact, at the moment trying to reduce their footprint, which is totally true. When I talk about a new economy, I talk about a more profound shift in point of view, because it's not just reusing or using less. It's about actually understanding that each organization is part of nature and as such is generating nature and taking care of it. So I do it myself. I use the word use, but instead it's about understanding being a real integral part of nature. So that if you do some harm to it, it harms you as well. So it's a profound different view on where you stand in the social and natural wholeness you're a part of. So the companies I researched are really, really setting a whole different type of. They are founded in a different worldview, and they define themselves part of nature instead of users of nature, and they define themselves part of society instead of servicing society. So they're really, really an integral part of the whole. And that, well, when you ask about how can NGOs become more of a part, I think there are several ways, because I see two things happening. I see NGOs having fewer funds or lesser access to funding. And what they do is they kind of make a move towards more entrepreneurial activities. So they reach out to social entrepreneurs to see if they can cooperate to achieve the same goal. For instance, I worked with a group of artists in Africa, in Mali, and their purpose was to serve social development in Ségou by organizing a cultural festival. And the cultural festival was organized by an NGO, of course, and supported by other NGOs in the world that say, well, we need to do something about our cultural heritage and cultural renewal, or enabling cultural renewal to emerge in Mali. And what happened is that out of that festival, the whole village kind of develop economic activities that support them for the whole year. So there's an interesting cooperation between what the NGO wanted to establish and the economic activities and the new economy actually that emerged in that area that makes it possible for them to become self-sustainable in that area. Mm-hmm. So that's a beautiful way of doing it. Another example is also in Africa. It's the organization African Parks that really want to restore nature and game protection in South Africa and other countries in the southern part of Africa as well. And what they do is they set up parks like the Kruger Park, you could say, but they invite communities and they invite companies to actually co-work with them to make that social and economic development go hand in hand with what they do in nature restoration and preservation. So that's also a very beautiful way of cooperation between NGOs and companies, and to a mutual benefit, actually.
Oh, absolutely. And rather than just looking at one aspect of things, really looking at how that sounds like they're being intentional about trying to grow the sustainability, the economic sustainability of the communities that they're serving. And a lot of times we do see NGOs coming in and providing one part of the service without really looking at the whole.
Yeah, exactly. That is the beauty of what these cutting-edge new kind of social entrepreneurs try to do, is they try actually to make that whole to develop, and in a mutual beneficial way and in harmony with each other. So they reach out to NGOs, and NGOs start reaching out to these companies to work together, so that social development, natural development, and economic development are going hand in hand, actually. Mm-hmm. So that's and even cultural development, actually.
In your interviews, did you explore how these groups came to find out about each other and how they really started that partnership? Did that come up?
Yeah, that did come up. Well, that is different in different regions in the world. I did a lot of research in Africa and also in Europe. And what you see in Africa is that whenever you start an initiative, especially in the rural areas, people are used to start talking about that with each other and say, okay, what do you think? And they call that, they say it in French, they say you have the word palavre, which means talking under the tree, parle sous l'arbre. And we looked at that as kind of a strange thing people do, just sitting and chatting. But what the Africans say, the best way to start things is by sitting and talking and going over it in several ways and looking at it from different angles. And then you will see what will be the essence that we need to hold on to while we are actually executing an idea. So that means that all people involved or people that feel involved are kind of invited to step into that talk. So if you kind of align with that tradition, it is completely normal that all different people and different organizations cooperate on economic initiatives. In Western Europe or in the West, that is not the case. So that requires a way more active approach actually to meet each other and to say, okay, how can we work together? And there was a beautiful initiative in the north of the Netherlands, which is about fishing. And we have there a nature reserve in the sea. And these fishermen say, well, if you fish in a way that the act of fishing becomes nature preservation, then we have a mutual benefit. Well, because we can do our fishing and we have an economic way of making our living. And at the same time, we make sure that the sea comes at rest and evolves and stays in balance. And they said, well, that is the way we used to do it long ago. And so what we do, we don't make a plan what we will fish. We will just see what is abundantly available. And immediately that kind of got them in trouble with the entrepreneurs, because a restaurant or a shop just wants to know what fish is going to be on the plate that evening. So they just want to order a specific type. And they said, well, we need to do something. We need to reach out. So they reached out to restaurants, to chef cooks, to shops, and said, well, we need to find a concept that we can put value to that element of surprise and to that element of nature preservation, and what that means on how you cook and what you get on your plate and how you do the marketing of your restaurant and the marketing of your shop. So hand in hand, they kind of worked that through, and more people became involved. So they organized street markets and farmers markets. And one of the curious things that happened is I did all kinds of interviews with people in that system, and at a certain point, I ended up in a menswear shop. Well, and the owner of that shop was the head of the retail organization in a little village, organizing all kinds of markets. And within that shop, there was a big table, and a lot of people were sitting there and drinking a cup of coffee, and later on a couple of guys came in, and they had a meeting in that shop. And I said to him, what is it? It's a menswear shop. What are those people doing here? Oh, he said, well, they use my shop as a meeting room. And that's how the fishermen actually came in touch with him, because they used his shop as a meeting room. So it is very interesting how you see that functions get blurred and mixed and hybrid. And that is also a way of meeting each other, getting connected, and finding ways of rethinking how you market, or how you organize, or how you share means, or how you combine purposes of very, very different things and very, very different initiatives and very different organizations and people.
Yeah, that's fascinating. What other initiatives come to mind? Because that's a fishing village where people are coming together. Do you have any examples from perhaps larger cities where the informal structures aren't so difficult? Because sometimes in large communities especially, we tend to get isolated. We tend to go off in our different corners, the nonprofits in one place, and NGOs in one place, the big companies in one place, small businesses in another. There aren't a whole bunch of informal structures in places where people can interact. Do you have examples of that, or any suggestions for people who find themselves in that situation?
Yeah, sure. Another company I work with is called NVU, and what they do is they actually are an incubator and an accelerator of companies that that as a main goal have to contribute to social development or to nature preservation. And they did a project in Bangalore, which is quite a big city in India, if not a huge city.
Huge.
And huge. And as you might know, in those cities there are a lot of those tiny little tuk-tuks. So it's taxis on 3 wheels and making a lot of noise, producing a lot of dirt, and what they did is they developed an electromotor for that kind of tuk-tuks. And they worked with people. Well, most people driving those tuk-tuks live in slums or live on the street. So they created step by step a community of taxi drivers that were driving those tuk-tuks, and gave them loans to renew their tuk-tuks and made them electrical. And that was the first step. The next thing they did is say, if you're sick, you need insurance. So we need to do something that the continuity of your income is assured on the longer term, because it's not just about having a cleaner air and quieter tuk-tuks or taxis, but it's about quality of life. Mm-hmm. So they made a collective, actually, that shared a fund that helped them when they are sick or when they can't work. The next thing they did is, well, we have a tuk-tuk. Can we earn money in different ways with that tuk-tuk so that we can kind of gradually raise our incomes a bit? So they started using the tuk-tuks as advertising boards. And that worked really well because they went all through the city. So what you see is that they, in a country or in an initiative like this, they build up this community from scratch, but very functional, where it is way less functional at first sight. In the example with the men's clothing shop and the fishers. In this example, you see how it is built up step by step and looking at all aspects of the people's lives involved in that specific entrepreneurial niche. So that's another way of doing it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's really as much a different way of thinking as it is a different way of operating. So it's looking at the big picture and trying to discern and see ways that we can have broader impact, not just bigger impact, but broader across different areas.
Yeah, and it's about linking things as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what you do see is that because there are differences. What we do with the tuk-tuks is that the tuk-tuks are still owned by the taxi drivers or by groups of taxi drivers. You do see also initiatives coming up now where it's more a way of sharing, so making joint means. So a group of taxi drivers with a group of taxis that all together serve a community in taxi driving. So then the economic model as having just one company with two taxi drivers and one taxi change into a more communal kind of space. That's also an interesting development that we see happening. And what actually is also interesting, because what NVU does when they start a process of incubating and accelerating, they have a large virtual community, which is mostly in big cities all over the world. And when any idea comes up, they kind of send it out in their community, and it's, 10,000s of people. And they ask them, what do you think about this idea? And if nobody responds or many respond negatively, they don't do it. So they really use the community for understanding where the energy is for renewal, what people really think is important. So they have a whole network worldwide of ambassadors. And that's people of every kind. It's people working in NGOs, it's young people, it's old people, it's people in Africa, in the US, in Russia, just all over the place. So this rural thing that we were seeing in that communal thing in the rural areas, that does exist in cities, but in a virtual space, not so much in a physical space. So I really think that our ways of connecting are changing, and these new companies find a way to relate to that and to make that to their use or to their service. And that brings out totally new combinations of feedback. So it's very interesting that people respond to an idea which is, who don't have an economic background or who are not entrepreneurs, who are so, and that's very interesting because everybody's voice is heard and is equally valued.
Very fascinating. Well, I could go on probably for hours continuing to talk about this, but we're at the end of our time. Do you have any closing words to provide encouragement or inspiration for people who are trying to head in this direction?
Yeah, absolutely. what really makes a difference for most of the companies because I work with a lot of established companies as well, and somehow the management and the leaders in those companies are quite far off of what's happening in the real day-to-day world of people that are middle class or below middle class. And what I do see, if I invite those people, those leaders, into that real world, and there can be the slums in India, or there can be the lower middle class in the US, and really have a meeting and have a conversation and work and stay with each other for a couple of days, the way those people start, or taking them to nature areas or areas of nature that are severely damaged or that are threatened to be lost, then these people get touched by it and get engaged. And really, then I see the spirit coming up of really wanting to change something. So I really say to all leaders, reach out, go there, step into the real world, let it touch you, let it come to you, and see what you can engage with from what's really out there. So that's what I would say, and that's what I would advise actually everybody to do more and more.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Godelieve.
Yeah, thank you.
And thanks to all our listeners for everything you do to make the world a better place.
Thanks for listening to the Social Good Instigators podcast with Kirsten Bullock. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll check out our prior episodes, and that you'll pass along our web address, socialgoodinstigators.com, to your friends and colleagues in the social good sector.